Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday and happy Thanksgiving to you and yours from the National Weather Service Alaska Weather Team. And of course, we hope that you're having a good time with your family and friends tonight. And as always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your latest weather information. You can do that easily by going to weather.gov/Anchorage on your phone, and that'll get the information to you if you have a good cell connection. That's a much faster way than using the whole web page, which you can find at arh.noaa.gov or weather.gov/Alaska. The weather info line's open. If you're traveling, you can check in on weather conditions anywhere in Alaska at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook at NWS Alaska, NWS Alaska, as well as the other Weather Service office forecast pages using the hashtag AKWX. Will clue you into the conversation happening from anyone else on Alaska weather as well. And find us on YouTube in the afternoon. The surface map briefing is always up by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and you can get a sneak peek at what we're going to talk about right here on Alaska Weather. Here's what I'm going to talk about tonight. The Alaska Weather headlines easily are the winds are diminishing over southeast, and the good news is thanks to the high pressure system over the Yukon and the Northwest Territories that is dropping slowly southward. It wasn't as strong as expected, so the winds weren't as strong over southeast. So good news there, and also that pattern is weakening somewhat, so the winds, if any, should be diminishing as we go through the next 24 to 36 hours. Frontal boundaries moving into southwestern Alaska. With that, a dying front will start to is bringing some snow to southwest right now. I had some gusty winds moving through St. Paul and the Pribilofs earlier this evening, and those will continue to work their way eastward. There'll be more of a snow issue for the west coast, and eventually some of that's going to pass through south central as we get into Saturday with a quick round of snow there. And then the remainder of that as we head into next week will be an unsettled pattern for the Bering and Gulf Coast regions. So that means better chances for snow perhaps in the southern coastal areas in south central and maybe in southeastern Alaska as well. So more to come for the next 4, 6, even 8 days after. Here's a look at the Bering Sea, and one reason we're talking about the unsettled weather, we've got a Bering Sea low here that is slowly weakening as it moves to the north and west. You can see that frontal boundary stretched all the way from St. Lawrence Island toward the southwestern coastline and now across False Pass and Cold Bay. As those winds were moving through, we did have some stronger gusts there around the Pribilofs today. Also got some snow falling around Shemya. And the winds were quickly moving through the central and eastern Aleutians. Most of what we're dealing with now across the southern Bering and the North Pacific is still rainfall, but there's a lot of cold air that's been pooled up across some parts of southwestern Alaska. We did have some threats for some freezing rain earlier, and it looks like now a lot of that has transitioned on over to snow. So we'll be dealing with some light snow showers across a good part of the southwestern coastline. Looking at the loop one more time, there's another wave developing a little bit further to the south and west, and as this moisture builds northward and low pressure continues tracking eastward, we'll have several more interactions with waves like this working into the Gulf. That should help to keep the Gulf of Alaska pretty unsettled as we get into, again, the extended period into Monday and Wednesday, even Friday of next week. There's several other waves that could bring more precipitation to many parts of southwest, south central, and maybe even southeastern Alaska. It will be kind of touch and go, but perhaps the pattern is changing enough that we're going to start to see some more winter-like precipitation rather than this in-between stuff. As we get into the rest of the state here, you'll notice southeast is still sitting pretty clear thanks to high pressure in charge of areas just to the north and east of you across the international border. And across the Alcan, what we're seeing is that milky white color. This is a sign that there's just a lot of cold air in place. The satellite's really focused on the clouds here, and what you're looking at here is mostly just cold ground. Low pressure is spinning there out to the west of Nunivak and St. Matthew Island, and that stronger south and southwesterly flows working in some of the higher moisture across the YK Delta and Kodiak Island and points to the south. We're still looking at areas along the northern coast, dealing with more of a southerly flow in the upper atmosphere, but at the surface that's been an easterly flow, and that seems to be diminishing as well as we go into the next couple days. In the meantime, clouds are breaking up across the Bering and the central and eastern chain. Watch for fewer areas of precipitation in the next couple days and more of a focus for a quick moving wave of snow to move across south central and eventually weaken even more as it moves eastward into the Copper River Basin and northern parts of southeast. Here's a surface chart then. Of course, we have an occluded front across the Bering Sea stretching all the way around that low, which is right now about 986 millibars. Snow is falling across southwestern Alaska. It looks like the better chance will be north and west of Dillingham for the rest of this afternoon and this evening. The front continues tracking north and east around the periphery of high pressure at 1,028 millibars. We still have our trough offshore of southeastern Alaska. There's low pressure attached to it as well at 998 millibars. And here's the high pressure system we were watching yesterday. We thought this was going to be about 8, maybe 9 millibars, a little bit higher than what it ended up with. So that's good news. We didn't get the really strong winds moving through the Juneau area and out of the passes. And without those winds, we don't have to worry about really extreme wind chills around White Pass. So if you're concerned and watching that wind chill advisory for White Pass earlier for tonight into tomorrow morning, that has been lifted as well. Tonight's forecast west of St. Lawrence Island brings that low pressure system up to about 990 millibars. The trough of low pressure extends across the north coast with that high pressure still just offshore there, but you can see how the winds will be turning a little bit more from the east on the northern edge of this boundary. Across the west coast, showers of snow and probably some rain across coastal areas, but by and large it's going to be snow for most areas. Around coastal sections of south central, expect rain mixed with snow out over the water, but once you get inland, it should be cold enough for some light snow, and that could include the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. Southeast right now still dealing with some gusty winds through the evening hours, but all of that should be letting up slowly and surely as we head into Friday. Pockets of light rainfall moving through the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, and we'll keep that west and southwesterly flow going along the chain through the rest of tonight. As we head into Friday, look for some light snow scattered across a large part of western Alaska. The interior of Alaska is starting to see more and more cloud cover as we go. High pressure is still extending its reach into the middle and upper Yukon Valley. You can see the clouds poking in there. Better chance for some rainfall around Prince William Sound, and there will be some snow showers hit and miss around south central, including the western Kenai Peninsula, the Anchorage Bowl, and the Matanuska and Susitna Valleys. For southeast, expect most conditions to be pretty clear for the day. The winds still breezy, but not terribly strong. Out across the west, some patchy showers there for the west and west central Aleutians, and some light rain should fall generally across the north and western Pacific. And across the Bering Strait, watch for some pockets of light snowfall there, including St. Lawrence Island and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. Going into Saturday, low pressure still hovering around the Bering Strait, and you can see how much that's weakened. It's up to about 1,010 millibars. Low pressure just south of Prince William Sound and east of Seward, sitting at 1,015 millibars. That's enough to stir up moisture there around the Chugach Range and probably slosh some snow up over the higher train and probably the Anchorage Bowl and the Matanuska-Susitna Valleys as well. The western Kenai Peninsula should be looking at some snow, and there'll probably be snow in Seward and Homer and into Prince William Sound and surrounding communities there. The coastal areas will be right there on that border between rain and snow, it looks like. And most of southeast still looking relatively clear, but clouds are moving in from the west, and with that a better chance for some showers starts to move in toward Port Alexander and probably Sitka by Saturday afternoon. To the west, a 980 millibar low there south and west of Sitka, pushing an inclusion northward, but it will be the triple point we want to keep an eye on. This is more of a powerful point of the storm as we get into Saturday and Sunday. It'll be collecting a little bit more moisture along that line and will probably lead to refocusing low pressure across the Gulf of Alaska as we go into the rest of the week. So we'll keep an eye on this part here, but rainfall and clouds will be spreading northward toward the Pribilofs, and you'll be looking at some stronger southerly winds on the leading edge of this boundary as it moves from west to east by Saturday night and into Sunday and eventually again into the Gulf. Here's a look at temperatures today. Obviously, high pressure was in charge of the middle and upper Yukon and the Yukon Territory itself. Look at these values down to 18, even 22 below along the Alcan, and then across the Alcan border itself down toward Northway with about 7 inches of snow on the ground and high pressure in control and a clear sky. You better believe it's getting cold. 16 below at 4 o'clock. The temperatures there this morning are down to about 17 below, so it really has not moved a whole lot in the last 24 hours. It may have been as warm as 1 below earlier today, but chances are temperatures really haven't budged too much if you're sitting in Northway. Around Fort Yukon, 24 below, reading there at 4 o'clock. Up around Bettles, 11 below today. For Fairbanks, a little bit of cold weather there at 9 below, nothing that you're not used to though. 22 around Anchorage, south central. We saw temps in the 20s and 30s along coastal areas from Seward to Homer, and southeast saw temps in the upper 20s around Haines and Skagway down to Juneau, and also down into southern parts of southeast. Temperatures were approaching the 40-degree mark for a little while, 36 in Hyder and 32 in Sitka. Looking northward, you'll see most of the cold weather is actually off to your east. The Arctic coast, including Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse saw temps anywhere from about 0 to as cold as 11 below, or around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, to 7 below in Kaktovik. Wainwright was 3 below. Kotzebue Sound temperatures, we're looking at readings in the teens and 20s, with Kivalina about 20, Kotzebue 16. Shishmaref was only 18 today, 22 in Nome, and 34 for Tin City. The Norton Sound region was in the lower 20s for the most part. Unalakleet was 23, Grayling 9, McGrath up the river in the Kuskokwim at 1 above. And then as you get out toward the Bristol Bay region, temperatures were hovering in the mid-30s, just above freezing today. So that was the reason we were watching for that threat for freezing rain. Looks like, again, most areas have turned over to snow. Around the upper 30s to low to mid-40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint, Cold Bay, and False Pass all mild today. Upper 30s around Kodiak Island. Gusty, but also a little bit on the milder side for the Pribilofs, with a high of 40 around St. Paul, and upper 30s for the central and western chain. On to low temperatures tonight. Look for temps anywhere from 15 to as cold as 32 below around the Yukon Flats, 17 below in Fairbanks, 5 to 15 above for South Central and the Kenai Peninsula, 32 in Kodiak, teens and 20s for Southeast. The Arctic Coast 5 to 15 below, 23 above in Nome, and the Southwest Coast in the 20s and 30s. The Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula also closer to 40 degrees. High temperatures tomorrow in the lower to mid 30s, with the Alaska Peninsula in the lower 40s. Right about 40 for Kodiak, and upper 20s and lower 30s for Southeast, with the Arctic Coast in the single digits. The Chukchi Seacoast, though, could be milder and in the teens, with Kotzebue Sound in the teens to low 20s. Fairbanks 2 below, and South Central again in the mid to upper 20s. Coastal areas along the Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound will see temps closer to 30. Flying weather tomorrow as you go back to work. Well, northern sections of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta should be looking at IFR conditions throughout the afternoon. And a lot of this will start out at VFR, but the surge of moisture is moving quickly westward, and as it moves along that front, watch for the passes and some of the mountains to slowly become a little more obscured with time. So be careful there into the afternoon as you go. South and western sections of the Bristol Bay region, Kodiak Island, all looking at increasing VFR from west to east throughout the day, and IFR conditions around the Bering Strait into the Chukchi Seacoast, and VFR for areas around Kiska to about Adak throughout the day. Let's check your pass conditions. Anaktuvik Pass itself looks okay, VFR, but south of that during the morning, MVFR should be developing. The same will be true for Adigan Pass, looking at VFR conditions throughout the day, but south of the entrance, again, anywhere from VFR to MVFR during the morning hours. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass both expected to turn over to MVFR throughout the day. Rainy Pass should also see conditions change. Windy Pass we expect to stay VFR. Same goes for Isabel Pass throughout the day. Mentasta Pass should remain VFR through most of your Friday. Tanita Pass is expected to turn back over to MVFR as we go into Friday afternoon. Porter's Pass will go quickly that way, MVFR by afternoon. And Chilkoot and White Pass at this point, we're going to call VFR for at least one more day. Freezing levels show the surface freezing line has dropped to about the coast around the Gulf of Alaska and over southwestern Alaska. We have some pockets of warmer air aloft, but not a whole lot's left. The pattern is changing toward colder and wintertime for sure. Freezing levels remain around 2,000 to 4,000 feet across south central, Kodiak Island, and the northern sections of the Bering. You'll have to climb above 2,000 feet north of St. Matthew to run into some occasional widespread moderate icing threat, and generally some isolated moderate south of the Kenai Peninsula to the Kenai Peninsula, or to the Kodiak Island region, I should say, generally above about 4,000 feet. The jet stream shows a broad trough moving across western Canada and eastern Alaska. With that northwesterly flow is enough to bring that colder air farther and farther south, and thus the freezing levels that we just saw are also dropping southward. Across the west coast, southerly winds are a little bit lighter there at 55 knots, but it is a southerly flow, and that is pulling some milder air northward up the coastline. Behind that, though, is another surge of low pressure that's coming out of the North Pacific, and that's what we were looking at on the satellite picture with that kind of leaf of clouds there out ahead of that low pressure wave. As that spreads eastward, we'll see the clouds fill in once again and push us back mainly into more of an unsettled pattern as we get into next week. The first wave of that is what we're dealing with right now, and that's what's cranking up the snow across the west coast. As we look at 9,000 feet, you can see the ridge of high pressure working its way into the middle and upper Yukon Valley. Wind speeds around 25 to 30 knots or so. Out across the western Bering, the winds are coming in pretty much due west, and that's allowing any moisture there to just work its way right across the Bering Sea. It's also adding a little bit more of a push to the speed of the front as it works in from the west to the east. Low pressure sitting across the Gulf of Anadyr just south of that. Winds are a little bit stronger at 20 to 25 knots, and we have those northerly winds working their way out of the higher terrain around the Yukon. Wind speeds there running anywhere from about 15 to 25 knots. At 3,000 feet, winds are fairly light across the interior, as you would expect under the control of high pressure, especially to the east. They go pretty light, about 5 to about 10 knots or so. Winds are running in from the north and from the east across the southeastern part of Alaska, anywhere from 25 to 30 knots there. Also have some light winds running around the ridge over the Gulf of Alaska. Those winds are about 10 to 15 knots or so, and high pressure is also found across the central and western chain. Wind speeds are running from 40 to 50 knots there, especially on the west side. That's all in advance of a stronger area of low pressure that's working its way eastward, and you'll see that on the chart in the coming days. And for turbulence now, it looks like southeastern Alaska is dealing with probably some occasional moderate throughout the rest of tomorrow. It'll be hit and miss. It doesn't look like it's going to be as strong as what we're talking about. So as we go throughout the day, the risk of more occasional moderate should slide southward with that weakening pressure gradient from north to east once again. And across the north, light to isolated moderate chop there across the northern Yukon and also across the Chukchi Seacoast, generally west of Barrow, west of the Seward Peninsula, and into the northern sections of the YK and the Gulf of Anadyr. Expect some occasional moderate there. Some of that will be below 4,000 feet. And for the central and western chain, hit and miss turbulence there, some of that reaching the potential for occasional moderate. Most of the eastern areas will see rapidly improving flying weather as the front continues to move eastward quickly and loses moisture and loses a lot of, if any, turbulence across the south and western side. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with a look at the ice edge and, of course, your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Perfectly positioned polygons. Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plot Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. Well, Dean, we've finally reached that time of year again.
Thanksgiving?
Yes, but more importantly, we're nearing the end of autumn, and it's at this time of year that we can see a multitude of celestial polygons, all in the sky at the same time.
Ah yes, we have a triangle, a square, a pentagon, and a hexagon. So, get ready while we connect the dots. Let's show you. Okay, we have our skies set up for just after sunset any night this week, and we'll start our polygon scavenger hunt facing west and work our way eastward.
And as luck would have it, the number of sides that each of our polygons displays increases by 1 as we travel eastward. So let's start facing west, and the first polygon that we see has 3 sides and 3 angles. It's none other than the summer triangle.
This pattern of bright stars is what we call an asterism. It's a geometric shape made by using bright stars from multiple constellations. The stars of the summer triangle are Vega, the brightest star in Lyra the Harp, Altair, the brightest star in Aquila the Eagle, and Deneb, the brightest star in Cygnus the Swan.
Moving upward to almost overhead is our next polygon, and it has 4 sides and 4 angles. The stars that make this polygon are all in the same constellation. We call it the Great Square of Pegasus, and it represents the body of the flying horse belonging to Perseus the hero. Let's draw it out. We'll start with Markab, which marks the base of the neck of Pegasus. Then we'll move northward to Shiat, which marks the point where the legs attach to the body.
We'll then draw the horse's stomach by continuing a line eastward to the star Alpheratz, which is a star that Pegasus shares with Andromeda the princess. Then, if we move southward to finish off the square, we arrive at the star Algenib, which completes the rear and back of the horse.
All right, so we've seen a triangle
with 3 sides
and a square
with 4 sides.
So we now need a 5-sided polygon.
A pentagon.
Exactly. And we have an excellent candidate for this if we aim ourselves to the northeast. The brightest of the stars in this pentagon also happens to be the closest of them, at only 42 light years away. Capella marks the apex of the pentagon-shaped constellation called Auriga the Charioteer.
The other stars that mark this constellation, traveling in a counterclockwise direction, are Menkalinon, which is 48 times as bright as our sun, 82 light years away, and marks the shoulder of the Charioteer. Moving southward, we have the star Mahasam, which marks the wrist of Auriga and is a binary star system over 166 light years away from us.
Moving further southward, we run into my favorite star in Auriga, Elnath. This star is approximately 131 light years from Earth, and it's a star that Auriga shares with Taurus the Bull, marking the end of one of the bull's horns.
Lastly, we move westward to the star Kabdilinon, which is roughly 500 light years away from us and is approximately 127 times the width of our sun.
So we have a triangle, a square, and a pentagon. We need a six-sided figure.
Well, you're in luck, because if you go out just before 10 p.m. your local time, the last stars of the winter hexagon will be rising in the east, just before the summer triangle sets in the west. If you have a clear horizon to the east and west, you can see them both in the sky at the same time. Let's start with Capella and move downward toward the horizon.
Here you have Castor and Pollux, the heads of the Gemini twins. Closer still to the horizon, you have Procyon in Canis Minor, and further south you have Sirius in Canis Major.
Moving upward, you have Rigel, the foot of Orion the Hunter. And then up to Orion's left, you have Aldebaran, marking the eye of Taurus the Bull.
Then, finishing off, we head back to Capella to complete the hexagon. 4 separate shapes made by 18 stars in 10 different constellations.
Wow! So get outside and play Connect the Dots and make some perfectly positioned polygons as you keep looking up.
Here's a quick check of the sea surface temperatures, and pay close attention to the northern sections of the Bering. You see these really dark blue, if not purple colors here. Those are temperatures that correspond to readings that are at or just below freezing there. So it's primed and ready for ice to form in pretty short order. But we've got that southerly wind working up the coast, so it's going to keep things at bay a little bit. There is some coastal ice forming, and remember, with that southerly and warmer flow, the ice may not be quite ready for you to be out on it just yet. So keep in mind that things could be changing out there along the ice edge, especially with that southerly wind. For right now, the sea ice edge looks like this. It's filling in around Kotzebue, around Norton Sound, and across the southwest coast, but it's probably most in danger across the southwest coast as well. The Arctic coast is starting to fill in fairly quickly, and as you would expect with light winds, that will continue. Anytime you want to check the outlook or the latest ice edge conditions, you can do that by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's the wind now for southeastern Alaska. A northerly flow rapidly diminishing as we head through the daytime tomorrow. Wind speeds in the inner waterways there anywhere from 25 to about 35 knots from the north, and 5-foot seas in the south, 9-foot seas in the north. And the offshore flow continues around the coast from 15 to as high as 25 knots. There may still be some higher gusts in the region, but watch for things to be settling down as we get into Saturday. In fact, they're going to become onshore as that trough moves a little bit further eastward, 15 to 20 knots then. 7 to 8-foot seas are expected along the coast. Northerlies continue all the way through Stevens Passage and the Chatham Strait, with southeasterlies going light across the Clarence Strait at 10 knots with a 2-foot sea, 20 knots in the north. Across south central, light northeasterly winds inside of Prince William Sound. Southerlies just outside and across the western Gulf. That'll be true as well, with more of a south and southeasterly flow into Resurrection Bay. Northeasterlies coming down the Cook Inlet at 15 to 25 knots, 3 to 5-foot seas there, and southeasterlies inside of Shelikof Strait with a light southeasterly flow. That gives us 3 knots or so. That'll become northwesterly though by Saturday at 20 knots with a 3-foot sea. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, and westerlies develop south of Seward into areas east of the Barrens and off of Kodiak Island. A northwesterly wind there at 20 knots with a 6-foot sea, 10 knots in the north around the Cook Inlet. And again, the ice is forming very, very slowly in there. In fact, not at all yet. We don't expect any ice in the Cook Inlet for at least another couple weeks. Northerlies inside of Bristol Bay at 10 knots with a 4-foot sea. Southerlies south and west of Castle Cape to Chignik with a 10-foot sea, 12-foot seas a little bit further down the coast, and 7-foot seas north of Cold Bay with a westerly 15-knot wind that cranks up to 25 knots by Saturday. Westerlies pushing into Bristol Bay at 15 knots on Saturday with a 4-foot sea, and northwesterlies moving off the Alaska Peninsula into the Pacific with a 7-foot sea there on Saturday. Now out to the west, and the Aleutians, a broad westerly flow still sweeping across, trailing the front. Northwesterly south of Unalaska, Nikolsky with a 20-knot flow, 12-foot seas there all the way down the coast to Adak and Atka. You'll get 9 to 10-foot seas in the western chain and 15 to 20 knots on the Bering side. That ratchets up to about 40 knots with a southeasterly flow, with the next wave of low pressure working itself northward from the Pacific. You'll see those gales there in some cases from Nikolsky out toward Adak and Atka, 13 to 18 feet, and southerlies coming across Unalaska and Nikolsky at 25 to 30 knots with 7-foot seas and northeasterlies in the western chain. For the west coast, 15 to 30 knots with south and southeasterly winds. More of a southwesterly flow for the St. Matthew and Island waters in St. Paul and St. George, 10 to 12 knots, and freezing spray is possible anywhere along the ice edge. By Saturday, winds are becoming a little more southwesterly. One exception will be outside of the Kuskokwim Bay at 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. Southerlies continue for the Pribilofs. And for the Arctic coast, easterlies working across the Beaufort Seacoast into the Chukchi Seacoast, about 15 to 25. Southeasterlies, 25, Cape Lisburne all the way down into Kotzebue Sound with 5 to 6-foot seas there. And then west of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, you'll see those winds becoming a little more easterly with time. Southeasterlies continue inside of Kotzebue Sound at 25 knots. And winds become a little more light and northeasterly around the Beaufort Seacoast. So that onshore flow, they're working into Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik. Now recapping your surface weather tonight, high pressure is weakening across the Yukon Territory and the south and western parts of Canada and British Columbia. As a result, even with the trough of low pressure here, those higher winds that we were talking about for southeast don't look to be as big of a threat. That also means wind chill advisories have been lifted for the White Pass area, so conditions easing somewhat in southeast. It may still be windy or blustery at times, but conditions should not be quite as bad as what was previously expected. Across south central, some areas of light snow are possible. The main focus for snow will be across the western coast with periods of rain across the Alaska Peninsula and parts of the Aleutians. Snow is forming ahead of a frontal boundary that's moving fairly quickly by Friday afternoon from west to east, bringing more clouds into the interior than anything else. Snow showers across the west with some accumulations there, and south central looking at an opportunity for snow to develop along Anchorage and some areas in the Matanuska and Susitna valleys and Kenai Peninsula as we head into Saturday with several inches possible. Out across the west, a new storm's lifting northward. That will rapidly increase the winds as we get into Saturday afternoon and Sunday. Happy Thanksgiving. We'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.